They said the only thing real in Hollywood was the risk. Classic Hollywood films dazzled us with spectacle, but how many near-death moments were hidden behind the curtain? What if your favorite on-screen miracles came at a price no one dared reveal? Tonight, we'll pull apart the studio gloss and see which stars survived brushes with tragedy that the world was never meant to know. Stay with us, because some of the darkest secrets are buried not in the credits, but in the silence. Buddy Ebson, The Wizard of Oz, 1939. For decades, Hollywood buried one of its most shocking on-set horror stories under a coat of shimmering silver. Buddy Ebson was cast as the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, expecting a career-making role, but instead, he nearly lost his life. Each day, MGM's makeup team slathered his face and neck with a mixture of clown-white grease paint and pure aluminum dust, the studio's chosen formula for a convincing metallic look. What Ebson didn't know, and what nobody bothered to warn him about, was that this glittering cosmetic was toxic. The particles seeped into his lungs, coating his airways like wet cement. Within days, Ebson was gasping for air in his hotel room, pain tearing through his chest. By the 10th day, he collapsed and was rushed to the hospital, where he spent weeks inside an iron lung, fighting to breathe. Production didn't stop. MGM, desperate to salvage their investment, simply replaced Ebson with Jack Haley and quietly altered the makeup. Ebson's ordeal was declared an allergic reaction, and the truth was locked away. Studio lawyers presented him with a new contract, making it clear, if he ever spoke of what happened, his Hollywood days were over. Ebson's blue eyes, once bright, were forever shadowed. The distinctive rasp in his voice, a permanent reminder of the role that almost killed him, was left out of every press release. Decades later, Ebson's story stands as a ghostly footnote, proof that, in old Hollywood, a little movie magic was sometimes deadlier than a bullet. Margaret Hamilton, The Wizard of Oz, 1939. It should have been a legendary entrance, fiery, grand, unforgettable. Instead, it nearly ended Margaret Hamilton's life. Playing the Wicked Witch of the West, Hamilton was rehearsing her dramatic exit from Munchkinland. She would vanish in a plume of smoke and a burst of flames, leaving behind a generation's worth of nightmares. The first take went smoothly, but after lunch, something slipped. On the second take, the trapdoor jammed, and Hamilton was caught for 3 excruciating seconds in the heart of a fireball. The copper-based green makeup slathered on her face, already a toxic hazard, ignited almost instantly, searing her skin. Her witch's hat became a torch, her broom a pyre. Hamilton's right hand was burned to the bone, her chin blackened, her lips and eyelids scorched. Crew doused the flames, but the pain was so intense, she couldn't even scream. MGM's official line was, timing error. There was no mention of the agony, the skin grafts, or the 6 weeks Hamilton spent recovering, bandaged like a mummy. The studio didn't send flowers, a fruit basket, or even arrange a ride home. Instead, they called within the week, asking when she'd return. When Hamilton finally came back, she did so with one demand: no more fire. The terror in her eyes on screen needed no acting. Hamilton finished the film with nerves still exposed and wore gloves instead of makeup. Hollywood would remember her as the greatest Wicked Witch ever, but off-screen, she became living proof that no one was safe when pyrotechnics came before people. Betty Danko, The Wizard of Oz, 1939. For every Hollywood legend, there's a forgotten double who risked everything for a scene no one remembers as dangerous. Betty Danko was Margaret Hamilton's stunt double, called upon to fly the witch's broomstick high over Emerald City, writing, "Surrender Dorothy," in the sky. The rig she was strapped into was little more than a metal bicycle seat bolted atop a steel pipe, 40 feet in the air. Inside the pipe, special effects techs packed a smoke pot with sulfur powder, meant to puff out smoke for the illusion of magical flight. No one considered what would happen if the powder ignited too quickly. On cue, the smoke pot became a makeshift bomb. The pipe exploded, tearing into Danko's leg and sending her spinning uncontrollably above the set. Only a hastily placed safety net prevented a fatal fall. Danko spent 11 days in Cedars of Lebanon Hospital as doctors tried to repair the shredded muscle in her leg. The studio sent flowers, but no workers' comp, no apology, nothing official to tie them to the accident. When she finally returned home, she brought the twisted piece of broomstick metal as a paperweight, a silent insurance policy against anyone who might claim it never happened. Danko's Hollywood career ended that day, her name omitted from production histories. In a city built on spectacle, her accident was just another secret swept under the MGM rug. Yakima Canutt, Stagecoach, 1939. The westerns of Hollywood's golden age were built on the myth of fearless heroes, but off-screen, the real danger was often to the men behind the stunts. Yakima Canutt, legendary for inventing the most death-defying feats in movie history, nearly lost his life during the filming of John Ford's Stagecoach. The scene called for an Indian to leap from a galloping horse onto the team pulling the stagecoach, then fall between the animals and be dragged underneath the speeding rig. Canutt rehearsed the maneuver endlessly, perfecting every movement. When the cameras finally rolled, something went wrong. Canutt's hand slipped, and he fell straight under the thundering hooves. Crew watched in horror, certain they were filming a man's death. Miraculously, the coach's wheels missed his head by inches. He emerged from the dust, battered and rope-burned, but alive. Ford kept the footage, raw, unscripted terror, and it became the template for all future under-the-coach stunts. The public saw only the daring on screen, never knowing how close Canutt came to disaster, or that every copycat afterwards risked joining Hollywood's long, hidden casualty list. For the studio, it was just another perfect shot. For Canutt, a career marked forever by the inches between life and death. Joe Canutt, Ben-Hur, 1959. For audiences, the chariot race in Ben-Hur was a masterwork of cinematic spectacle. For Joe Canutt, it was almost his last day alive. Son of Yakima Canutt and stunt double for Charlton Heston, Joe was tasked with executing a near-impossible feat, driving a four-horse chariot at breakneck speed, crashing into wreckage, and being thrown out, then clawing his way back in, all in one seamless shot. In rehearsals, everything went right. On camera, disaster struck. The safety belt snapped as the chariot slammed into the obstacle. Joe was pitched headfirst over the front rail, skidding across the dirt, perilously close to the pounding hooves of four Arabians and the massive wheels. Instinct and athleticism saved him. He dragged himself back on board, blood pouring from his chin. The director, William Wyler, kept the cameras rolling, unaware how close Joe had come to being trampled. 18 stitches later, Canutt's accident became part of film legend, but the studio never advertised how deadly the sequence truly was. In the era before CGI, the line between heroism and tragedy was measured in seconds, and the price for a perfect shot was often nearly everything. Buster Keaton, Sherlock Jr., 1924. In the silent era, pain was part of the punchline, and no one lived that ethos more than Buster Keaton. While filming Sherlock Jr., Keaton orchestrated a seemingly simple gag. His character pulls a lever on a water tower, expecting a trickle, only to be deluged by an avalanche of real water. The torrent hit harder than anyone expected, slamming Keaton onto the unforgiving railroad ties below. Dazed, but ever the professional, Keaton got up, rubbed his neck, and carried on. The crew didn't realize they'd just witnessed a true near-death moment. For years afterward, Keaton suffered from chronic headaches and neck stiffness. It wasn't until nearly a decade later, while getting an X-ray for a separate injury, that a doctor revealed he'd once broken his neck. The fracture had miraculously healed without intervention, a potentially fatal injury shrugged off as a bump and a bruise. Keaton, stone-faced as ever, could only marvel, well, that explains those headaches. The studio never publicized the risk or the injury. The gag made it into the film, and Keaton's pain became an uncredited co-star in the annals of slapstick. It's a chilling reminder that in the early days of Hollywood, survival often depended on luck as much as talent. James Kagny, Taxi, 1932. Hollywood's pursuit of realism sometimes bordered on lunacy, and the set of Taxi provided a notorious example. Director Roy Del Ruth wanted the sound and sight of genuine gunfire for a gangster shootout, so Warner Brothers loaded revolvers with live ammunition, firing bullets just past James Cagney's head for the shot. On the first take, a bullet shattered the plaster wall behind Kagny, sending a shard slicing into his cheek. The thin line of blood on his face was real, not makeup. Kagny, always fiery, walked off set and straight to the newly formed Screen Actors Guild, demanding that no actor ever be put at such risk again. The public never knew just how close one of cinema's most beloved tough guys came to being a casualty. Warner Brothers quietly rewrote safety rules, but the incident was omitted from any publicity material, the scar left unexplained in close-ups for years. That day, Kagny's pain forced Hollywood to finally draw the line between movie violence and mortal danger, but only after he'd risked his life for a sound effect. Howard Hughes, Hell's Angels, 1930. Howard Hughes's obsessive pursuit of spectacle became legend, but it nearly ended in tragedy during the filming of Hell's Angels. Determined to capture an unprecedented aerial sequence, Hughes ignored warnings from two professional pilots and chose to fly the dangerous dive himself. The amateur director-producer pilot climbed into the cockpit, forced the biplane into a near-vertical dive, and, when he tried to pull up, the controls jammed. The aircraft crashed into a field in a twisted heap. Pulled from the wreckage, Hughes was barely alive. His skull was fractured, his cheekbones shattered, and he underwent emergency surgery to insert steel plates in his head. The crash marked the beginning of his lifelong addiction to painkillers and contributed to his later mental unraveling. MGM and United Artists buried the story as best they could, releasing only sanitized statements. The footage made it into the film. Hughes himself, bandaged and barely able to speak, declared it usable but not worth it. But the price was etched on his reconstructed face and the pain he carried for the rest of his life. In the old Hollywood tradition, the show went on, but the scars were more than skin deep. Charles McGraw, Spartacus, 1960. The violence in Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus was intended to be cinematic, but for actor Charles McGraw, it became devastatingly real. In a brutal scene, Kirk Douglas's character smashes McGraw's jaw against a soup cauldron. Choreography was meant to keep the blow safe, but Douglas misjudged the distance. McGraw's jaw cracked audibly, and blood dripped into the prop soup. Remarkably, he finished the take, delivering his lines through what must have been searing pain. His jaw required immediate medical attention and was wired shut for 6 weeks. McGraw never sued, never complained, and the studio never reported the accident. Kubrick, always chasing realism, left the footage in the final cut. Audiences saw authenticity, never realizing it was captured at the cost of a man's health. Only years later, when extras began to talk, did the story surface. McGraw's injury became an open secret, a testament to the unspoken dangers lurking behind the grandeur of Hollywood epics. Tyrone Power, Jesse James, 1939. For audiences, the 1939 film Jesse James offered all the thrills of the untamed West, galloping horses, gunfights, and a legendary final stunt that left jaws dropped. But what most viewers never learned was the real-life horror behind the spectacle. In the film's climactic scene, Jesse James, played by Tyrone Power, makes a desperate escape by riding his horse off a towering 70-foot cliff into a river. On screen, it's a pulse-pounding moment of bravado. Off-screen, it was almost a tragedy. The man actually making that leap wasn't Power, but stuntman Cliff Lyons. The plan was simple: ride hard, go over the edge, and swim to safety. But as the cameras rolled, the horse panicked mid-fall. Lyons survived, battered and gasping, but the animal struck the water so violently that it never resurfaced. The crew watched in horror as the limp body drifted downstream. The studio immediately went into damage control, ordering the incident never be mentioned publicly, and instructing the cast and crew to keep quiet. The sanitized story sold to the public was one of Hollywood courage. The reality was an outcry from animal rights activists and shocked fans, with newspapers calling for accountability. The fallout forced the Motion Picture Association to establish new safety rules for animal stunts, but the trauma for those who witnessed the accident lingered. Lyons continued working, but always remembered the day a moment of movie magic crossed the line from daring to deadly. In the end, the price for Jesse James's realism wasn't just risk, it was the beginning of Hollywood's reckoning with on-set safety. A lesson learned the hardest way possible. Clark Gable, Gone with the Wind, 1939. When audiences watched Atlanta burn in Gone with the Wind, they saw movie magic at its most spectacular. What they didn't see was the panic behind the camera as real danger unfolded. The burning of Atlanta was filmed using full-scale fire, with gasoline and explosives igniting a massive backlot set. Clark Gable, the film's charismatic Rhett Butler, was on set, along with dozens of extras, horses, and crew. What was intended as carefully controlled chaos quickly spun out of control. Flames leapt higher than expected, wind shifted unpredictably, and several actors, including Gable, were suddenly surrounded by choking black smoke and searing heat. As the fire raged, escape routes became blocked by falling debris and collapsing set pieces. Some extras suffered burns and smoke inhalation, but the studio downplayed or concealed reports of injury, preferring to boast about the scene's realism. Gable himself barely escaped harm, pulling several others to safety in the confusion. No official records list the full scope of the injuries, and in press releases, MGM claimed nothing more dramatic than a few singed costumes. The truth was far more harrowing. Real terror, real risk, all in service of cinematic spectacle. For Gable and his fellow cast, survival depended on quick thinking, not studio safety measures. Jean Harlo, Saratoga, 1937. Jean Harlo was MGM's platinum queen, her image synonymous with vitality and sex appeal. But behind the sparkling facade, Harlo's health was deteriorating rapidly while filming Saratoga. She collapsed on set multiple times, suffering from nausea, swelling, and unbearable fatigue. Unbeknownst to the public, or even many in the crew, Harlo's kidneys were failing, a condition aggravated by the studio's relentless shooting schedule and her refusal to rest. Studio bosses pressured her to keep filming, convinced that any delay would jeopardize profits. Harlo, ever the professional, tried to hide her pain, even as she struggled to finish scenes. One collapse left her unconscious, only to be revived and pushed back into makeup for the next take. MGM kept her illness secret, feeding the press stories about the star's grueling work ethic. It wasn't until Harlo died at age 26, just days after her final collapse, that the truth emerged. The studio issued tributes, but their role in pushing Harlo to work through life-threatening illness was never fully acknowledged. Her death became a cautionary tale, but in classic Hollywood, the machine rolled on. Errol Flynn, They Died with Their Boots On, 1941. Errol Flynn was the swashbuckler of his era, famous for doing his own stunts and living as recklessly as the characters he played. On the set of They Died with Their Boots On, Flynn took the reins for a wild cavalry charge, a scene packed with galloping horses and gunfire. What the cameras didn't capture were the moments when disaster almost struck. During one intense take, Flynn's horse stumbled and threw him directly into the path of the onrushing herd. For a split second, Flynn was nearly trampled, scrambling to dodge hooves as chaos erupted around him. Stuntmen suffered broken bones, and at least one horse had to be put down after a fall. Warner Brothers concealed the extent of the injuries, eager to protect Flynn's reputation and keep the public focused on the action-packed spectacle. Flynn himself brushed off the incident, joking with the crew between takes, but the reality was more sobering. One wrong move could have ended his life. The finished film showcased his daredevil bravado, while the near miss, like so many in the Golden Age, remained an industry secret. Myrna Loy, The Rains Came, 1939. Myrna Loy, known for her poise and grace, faced real peril while filming the flood sequence in The Rains Came. The production's desire for realism meant pumping thousands of gallons of water onto a set filled with debris and hidden hazards. Loy, dressed in heavy period costume, was swept off her feet when the surge hit, pinned beneath the artificial current. For agonizing seconds, she was held underwater, her costume dragging her down while she fought for air. Crew members raced in and pulled her out, coughing and gasping, but alive. The studio quickly hushed up the near drowning, presenting the incident as a minor mishap. Loy's professionalism was praised, but the terror she experienced was swept aside. Filming resumed after a short break, and the movie's publicity focused on the breathtaking visuals, not the risk to its leading lady. In press photos, Loy looked as serene as ever. Off-screen, she carried the memory of the day when a demand for authenticity nearly cost her everything. John Wayne, The Conqueror, 1956. The dangers on some classic Hollywood sets weren't always immediate, but they could be just as deadly. The Conqueror was filmed downwind of atomic test sites in Utah, a fact brushed off by producers and the U.S. government alike. John Wayne, cast as Genghis Khan, spent months working and living in an environment contaminated by radioactive dust. The cast and crew played in the dirt, posed for press, and even brought samples home as souvenirs. At the time, there were no warnings, no masks, no precautions. In the years that followed, tragedy unfolded. Wayne and dozens of others from the production, including director Dick Powell and co-star Susan Hayward, developed cancer, many dying young. The studio and the government minimized the risks and dismissed early concerns as paranoia. Official statements denied any link between the filming location and the cancer cluster that followed. Only years later did the truth begin to surface. The set itself had been a silent killer, and Hollywood's appetite for spectacle had left a legacy of loss that could not be covered up forever. Gloria Swanson, male and female, 1919. Before she was the face of silent cinema's glamour, Gloria Swanson faced death in the name of spectacle. On the set of Cecil B. DeMille's Male and Female, Swanson was asked to perform a dramatic sequence inside a lion's cage for a dream sequence. To heighten the scene's mystique, DeMille insisted on using real lions, and to keep them calm, the crew filled the cage with chloroform gas. Swanson, decked in heavy costume and elaborate headdress, was locked inside with the sedated beasts as the director called action. At first, the plan worked. But as filming dragged on, the air grew thick with chemical fumes. Swanson's vision blurred. She felt faint, her chest tightening with every breath. When she finally stumbled from the cage, the crew realized she was moments from collapsing. She was rushed outside, gasping for air, and narrowly avoided a serious, possibly fatal bout of poisoning. The studio, eager to maintain DeMille's legend, described the incident as a minor fainting spell, attributing it to the excitement of working with lions. But Swanson herself later recounted the terror and the recklessness of the moment, condemning the old Hollywood mindset that risked lives for spectacle. Her ordeal became an open secret among insiders, but was never reported to the public. Instead, the finished film was hailed for its realism, with Swanson's fear read as acting genius. The reality, she survived a deadly stunt that could have turned the dream sequence into a nightmare, just another price paid for Golden Age authenticity. Conrad Vite, The Thief of Baghdad, 1940. The Thief of Baghdad dazzled audiences with magic, color, and scale, but behind the technicolor illusion, danger lurked in every tank and trick. Conrad Vite, cast as the villainous Jafar, was at the mercy of the film's elaborate underwater sets. In one pivotal scene, Vite's character is to be dramatically tossed into a water tank. What the cameras didn't catch was the peril beneath the surface. The heavy, ornate costume, designed for visual spectacle, became waterlogged almost instantly. The weight dragged Vite down, pinning him at the bottom. The actor struggled, tangled in fabric, the air trapped in his lungs running out. Only quick-witted stagehands realized the star hadn't resurfaced and dove in to save him. Vite was hauled out, gasping and shaken, but determined to finish the film. Alexander Korda's production machine kept rolling. No press releases, no mention in the Hollywood trades. The official line was that the cast had embraced the film's challenges. In reality, Vite had come dangerously close to joining the list of actors lost to movie magic. The studio's silence wasn't unique. It was business as usual for a system where spectacle always trumped safety, and every on-screen miracle came with off-screen risk. Paul Muni, The Good Earth, 1937. In The Good Earth, MGM prided itself on realism, right down to the locust swarm that devastates the fields. For Paul Muni and the rest of the cast, realism meant enduring a literal torrent of live insects. Hundreds of thousands of locusts, shipped in for the scene, were dumped over the actors as cameras rolled. What the audience never knew was just how close this gamble came to disaster. Muni, smothered in insects, panicked as they crawled into his nose and mouth, threatening to suffocate him. Other actors suffered allergic reactions, welts, and frantic attempts to swat away the cloud of bugs. MGM called it dedication to art in publicity materials, but offset, medics treated Muni for severe distress and shortness of breath. The studio quickly shut down talk of injuries, fearing bad press and wasted investment. The sequence became a cinematic triumph, but those who lived it knew the price. The line between performance and peril blurred by the relentless pursuit of authenticity. For Mooney, who carried the trauma for years, and for the crew who witnessed the panic, the lesson was clear. Hollywood's quest for realism sometimes meant risking life for a moment on film. Olivia de Havilland, The Snake Pit, 1948. Playing the emotionally fraught Virginia Cunningham in The Snake Pit required Olivia de Havilland to descend into a world of psychological torment, but it was a real physical threat that nearly ended her performance. For one unforgettable scene, the production called for de Havilland to be surrounded by live snakes in a pit. Her terror meant to be captured in a single, harrowing take. The actress, though apprehensive, agreed for the sake of realism. On set, the snakes slithered unexpectedly close, and one coiled tightly around her arm, while another brushed her face. In the chaos, a third snake snapped at her hand, its fangs just barely breaking the skin. The shock sent de Havilland into a near panic, but the director kept the cameras rolling. Quick-thinking crew rushed in, pulling the actress to safety and tending to the bite. The studio downplayed the incident, praising de Havilland's courage and dismissing the encounter as harmless. What the press never reported was how close she came to a full-blown emergency, one that could have ended in tragedy had the snake been venomous or the reaction more severe. The danger, like so many in Golden Age Hollywood, was quietly edited out of the story. Spencer Tracy, Boomtown, 1940. When Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer mounted the oil rig explosion sequence for Boomtown, they promised audiences a spectacle. What they never, and psychological, remained. The danger was never spoken of publicly, another near-fatal brush with death, chalked up to Hollywood's obsession with spectacle over safety. For Tracy, the lesson was clear. In the Golden Age, even the biggest stars were never out of harm's way, and secrets buried deep. These near-fatal accidents weren't just stories, they were warnings. As we celebrate the magic of classic films, we owe a nod to those who risked everything for an illusion. Which story shocked you most? Drop your thoughts below, and if you crave more untold Hollywood history, subscribe for the next trip behind the velvet curtain,